Good afternoon. Welcome back, everyone. We are currently in the course of hearing a presentation by Mr. Millett of the Arconic documents. So if you're ready to continue, Mr. Millett, please do so.
Mr. Chairman, I am. Thank you very much. There is one event that occurred during the time that the BBA was assessing Renobond first certification in 2007, which is where we were when we left off before the break. Can we go first then to META 401953? This is an Alcoa visit report, as you can see, and the visit is to a company called Astrup in Oslo, Norway. And the report is written by Gerard Sontag. The date of the visit is 11th to the 13th of September 2007. The people present were some people from Astrup and from Arconic. You can see who was present: Gerard Sontag, the marketing manager, and Didier Felder, area sales manager. At point one, if we look a little bit lower down the document, you can see the reason for visit. Astrup organized a 3-day open days to celebrate the 150 years of the company. And below that, we can see that under general information, Astrup is described as the biggest metal and plastic distributor in Norway, with 4 warehouses and 4 additional sales offices around the country. That's what it says. Can we look at page 2 of this report, please? You can see a section there called Seminar Presentations, under which it says, each of the suppliers was invited to present 2 times over the 3 days their product or a subject related to his product. Below that, we see AAPM. See that? And then Offertal underneath that. And that Offertal presentation is a reference to a presentation given by Mr. Fred Roderick Pohl. And you can see that at the bottom, or towards the bottom of the page. If you go about halfway down that block of text, and picking it up, it says, Mr. Fred Roderick Pohl, Pohl Consult International, was during more than 20 years the export manager for Alcan Novelis, FF2 and FF3 in alloy 5754H42, and is working as consultant for specification work. He writes also regularly articles in different aluminium and wall cladding magazines in different countries. The last, called Solid Aluminium versus ACM, quotes unquotes, was published in the International Aluminium Journal in July-August 2007. He's preparing a new book that he planned to publish at the end of the year concerning cladding solutions with painted aluminium. Now, that's important because we get to see next what the content of the presentation is and what Mr. Sontag, the author of this report, says about it. If we go to the bottom of page 2, you can see he says, the presentation where he compares ACM and solid aluminium was a very high shock for me from 2 points of view. On one side, a part of the information that he used against technical possibilities and deflection of the ACM were not true, or only partly, and too much orientated on the specification of alucobond. On the other side, the true information that he gives of the fuel power of a PE core on a product of 5,000 square meters, where he compares it to a truck of 19,000 litre oil, is very impressive and was well received by all customers who were present during the presentation. The arguments was also documented with pictures of ACM fire in the world and a movie from the Twin Tower in Doha showing how quick a fire can evolute with a PE ACM core. All arguments were supported by the pictures, who showed a tremendous big volume of toxic smoke, who was even much more dangerous than the fire himself, because in such a case, a person could die from the smoke emission within the first 2 or 3 minutes of the fire. If we go on down to the second last paragraph in this section, staying on the same page, it says this: Claude Verlet showed me 2 months ago a copy on paper from this Alcan Novellis presentation, where the arguments were mentioned, but Mr. Pole is a very persuasive person, and the arguments are 10 times much stronger during the seminars. We now go to the conclusion in this document. 3 paragraphs down, he says, let's imagine, if you could see that, let's imagine that Utterfile organise a lobbying activity on the European Parliament and show such a presentation in Bruxelles. The result could become catastrophic for the ACM products. One of the arguments from Mr. Pole was, what will happen if only one building made out PE core is in fire and will kill 60 to 70 persons? What is the responsibility of the ACM supplier? If we want not to take any risk for anyone and be proud of the EHS value of Alcoa, we should evaluate a new option in our LT strategic analysis. What could be the financial results and impact on the market if Alcoa decide to sail Reynobond architecture only with an FR core and launch it on BAU 2009? In parallel, we should, of course, in this case, launch a cost reduction program to become able to produce the FR to the cost of the PE. Then he signs himself off, Gerard Sontag, marketing manager. Now, that document I've read at some length. Clearly allowances need to be made for the author's English, but it's very clear, notwithstanding that. Questions which arise would include, was there any discussion within Arconic, either before or after this meeting, about selling only ACM with an FR core? If there was, what happened to those discussions? Specifically, was there any discussion within Arconic about Mr. Sontag's question, what is the responsibility of the manufacturer in the event of a fire of the type and magnitude he describes? We can see from the last paragraph I've just shown you that Sontag proposed that Arconic should launch a cost reduction program to be able to product the FR to the cost of PE. The question there is whether this meeting and the content of it, as shown by this document, was the driver for the program FE at PE cost, FR at PE cost, that was discussed in the evidence. Was the background to that program the known dangers of PE cord ACM identified in this paper? We can then turn to 2011. We'll go back with the BBA witnesses, of course, to the BBA certificate in due course. And we've already seen quite a lot of that already anyway. In 2011, some 6 years after the initial tests 5A and 5B on Reynobond 55 PE, Arconic performed 2 more European classification tests on that material. I can start with the rivet. As you know from test 5A, the classification accorded to rivet in 2005 was BS1D0. There was a further classification in 2011, and this is dated 9th of February 2011, and it's at ARC 50383. You could see the date of that, 9th of February 2011, and if we go to page 4, we can see the classification BS1D0. So that's the 2011 classification. Can we have up at the same time the test 5A from 2005? That's ARC 50358. And have again, please, page 4. We can see there that in 2005, the test 5A was BS2D0. And if you look at section 4.3 under field of application at the foot of each of the pages, you can compare the two. On the right-hand side of the screen, you've got test 5A, 2005, showing in the last or second bullet point under the second heading under 4.3 field of application, it says with a minimum air gap of 50 millimeters. If you look then to the left-hand side of the screen and look at the 2011 classification report in the same place, in the second bullet point, it says, again, with a minimum air gap of 50 millimeters. So you've got, just to summarize, you've got the 2005 test 5A, classification BS2D0, and in 2011, a slight improvement, BS1D0, both of which saying minimum air gap of 50 millimeters. Now, there's a question or line of investigation about that air gap. Can we start looking at that by going to Mr. Verley's witness statement at page 19 of paragraph 64? At the end of that paragraph, you can see it says, 3 lines up from the bottom, it is correct to say that different air gaps and thicknesses of insulation, for example, are likely to influence the test result achieved. I had previously used an air gap of 50 millimeters for some tests, but since July 2011, I believe only air gaps of 20 millimeters were used. You can see the 2011 report was February 2011. Now, let's look at some contemporaneous documents on that question next. MET 30's 53158, page 184. This is the part 1 of Mr. Verley's exhibit run. And this is the end of an email chain with CSTB about testing later on in 2011. If we go to the bottom of page 184, we can see an email of the 1st of July 2011 from Claude Verler to Maxime Bauer at the CSTB. He says, hello, can you tell me how big the air gap between the Rainabond cladding and the insulation was during the test? Above that, you can see Mr. Bauer responds. He says, the air gap was 20 millimeters for all tests performed so far. We used 30 millimeters rock wool. And above that, we can see that Mr. Verley thanks him and says, I do think that this is how the panels should be tested because that's how they're used. And if you scroll up to the, I think actually that's the top of the page. That then raises a number of questions at this time. First, who was responsible for designing the test set up in 2005 and 2011, in particular for testing the cladding with a 50 millimeter air gap as opposed to a 20 millimeter air gap? Did Mr. Verler himself think that 20 millimeter air gaps were how Rainabond panels were typically used? And if so, was that the case in 2005, or did perhaps his understanding change between 2005 and July of 2011? Did he think that 50 millimeter air gaps did reflect or did not reflect the typical end use of panels? And what was it about the situation that pertained in 2005 that led him to test the panels with a 50 millimeter air gap in that year, and indeed the same in the February of 2011? That leads to a broader question. If it's right that the air gap can make a difference, and if it's right that the 50 millimeter air gap was not realistic, then were the tests that produced the B classifications for PE in rivet fix in 2005, BS2 D0 under test 5A, and in February 2011, BS1 D0, truly representative of the expected fire performance of PE cord Rainabond in rivet form? There's some further evidence that sheds a little bit of light on that question. After the February 2011 test, rivet fix Rainabond never got a B classification in European tests under EN 13501 again. Thereafter, all the tests indicated that it was a class C. Can we go to a bundle of unexhibited documents? MET 30/64988 at page 129. This is a set of documents not exhibited to any of the Arconic witnesses' statements. At page 129, you can see an email from Claude Verler to Julia Kajasanik, who was a sales representative for Arconic in 2016. And they are discussing here fire certification of a competitor. This is an email from Mr. Verle to Julie Kajasanik. And he says, Julie, this is a certificate for PE, not for FR. We also had a class B at the time in PE, but by arranging the system to pass, and he puts the word arranging there in inverted commas. So this report is really not a reference. Have a nice weekend. Now, this email and its meaning was put to Mr. Schmidt on day 1 at page 76 at lines 3 to 6, and he was unable to assist us. The question therefore remains outstanding. What did Mr. Verle mean by arranging the system to pass? Does that mean that it was manipulated so that it would pass, or was there some other meaning to what he's saying here? If that is correct, in what way was the arrangement made? Specifically, was the CSTB providing any particular advice or assistance in making the arrangements, whatever they were, for the rivet tests to get a B? Was anybody else assisting or advising? For example, a fabricator. Who else within Arconic knew about this arrangement to pass, as Mr. Verle described it? Was this a course of conduct sanctioned by upper management? There's another document which may also shed light on this question or these questions, but it's later. It's in 2014. Can we go to MET 30/64988 at page 64? This is an email of the 31st of January 2014. If we look at the bottom of the page 64, you can see that it is from a gentleman called Gregoritis Ernst to Claude Verler. And as we'll see, and indeed have already seen, on that date, 31st of January 2014, both rivet and cassette PE were classified as Class E by the CSTB. Now, if we follow the email chain up from page 64 through 63 to 62, you can see how this works. The question, if we follow up 62, comes from Ernst Gregoritis. I think it's Ernst Gregoritis rather than Gregoritis Ernst. And he says, hi, Claude, I don't think you understood my question. According to the SBI test, Reynard PE was a B, and now suddenly it's E. On the one hand, E cannot be mounted on the facade any longer. And on the other hand, I don't understand how a core can be reclassified from a B to an E, question mark. And the response, if one scrolls up a little bit higher, from Claude Verle to Mr. Gregoritis is, and this is the 14th of February 2014. Hi, it was always E for cassettes. For the riveted system, it was B, but only with a certain rear ventilation distance. The new certification is now valid for both systems, cassettes and riveted. We were asked for there to be only one class per product, depending on the system. I hope it's clear. If not, we can talk on Monday. Now, this raises the obvious question whether, in fact, the Euro Class B was and had always been known by Mr. Verle to have been achieved by using a 50mm air gap, such that, in fact, when tested with the requisite 20mm air gap, it would not have achieved a B. That's the outstanding question. An outstanding question. Can we next turn then back to 2011 and look at what happened with the test done by the CTSB for PE cassette in that year? If we go to Claude Verle's witness statement, please, at page 18, paragraph 62 first. Paragraph 62, he says this. On the 29th of March 2011, I sent the CSTB an email with a copy of the unclassified test report from the 2005 cassette PE test and inquired what was the best classification that could be obtained with the said report. I inquired whether a classification D could be possible, exhibited at page 109. I had become aware from discussions with either the EAA or the CSTB sometime around 2010 that other products similar to AAPSAS's PE product had possibly shown a difference in reaction to fire testing between the cassette and rivet variant. I was therefore concerned to find out whether AAP's original understanding, i.e. that the rivet variant would perform less well, could be incorrect, and I wished to check this position through further testing. So we see here that Arconic waited 6 years before instructing the CSTB to perform another test on Renabon 55 PE. We can also see that Mr. Verlet says he didn't even ask for a full set of the 3 tests. The question we would have is, why is that? Why did he not ask for that, and why did he wait so long? We can also see that he asked if he could use test 5B in order to get a class D on the PE cassette. Now, if one puts that in context, looking at the time, this is 2011, March 2011, we know by this time that Mr. Verlet is aware of fires, for example, the Bucharest fire in 2009, and in his own words, how dangerous PE can be when it comes to architecture. That's a reference to his email of the 17th of July 2009 to Claude Schmidt at MET30531558_P10 at page 122. And to add to that, you saw emails on the 15th and 16th of March 2010, so almost exactly a year before these events he's describing at paragraph 62, in which Claude Verlet told Isabel Moises, RB in cassette doesn't achieve a B either. And that was something to keep, in his words, in caps, very confidential. And the English version of that email is at MET30649888, page 125. And now, in the light of the background events I've just described from the documents, the questions that arise are whether it was the concerns expressed in 2009 and 2010 that had prompted Mr. Verlet's concern to revisit his original understanding that rivet would perform less well than cassette, and whether indeed he had realized, or at least suspected, before he decided to test cassette again in 2011, that the cassette test 5B from January 2005 was not a rogue result. There's a further question, whether in fact the idea that 5B was a rogue result was ever a view genuinely held within Arconic, and if it was, when Mr. Verlet first began to suspect that it was unfounded. Let's remind ourselves next about what happened in the 2011 Renabon 55 PE cassette test. Can we go please to MET30531558, page 172. If we go to the second email from the top of the page, we can see that it's from Maxime Bauer of the CSTB on the 29th of June 2011. And again, I think you've seen this document before, but let's revisit it now that we have some further context. He says, "Hello, Mr. Verlet, we have performed a test on your reference Renabon PE. Unfortunately, we stopped the test before the end of the test. Note, fall of large pieces of the small wing, widespread fire on the surface, reaching critical values, resulting in the termination of the ongoing test, 350 kilowatts. Therefore, we cannot provide you with a classification for the cassette version. I propose that this project be concluded for an amount of €2,297, SBI test plus cleaning costs plus main burner repair." So, like the 5B test, the PE cassette test in 2011 was stopped for the reasons that Mr. Bauer gives in this email. But at the top of If we look up at the top of the screen there, we can see that Mr. Verlet responds on the same morning, a few minutes later. Hello, is this far from a declassification? The question that arises on that document is whether he thought at that time that it was realistic for the PE cassette version of Railbon 55 to obtain a declassification at all. Now, here's what Mr. Verlet has to say about that test. Can we go to his witness statement, please, at page 18 at paragraph 63? It's important that you put this in context of his witness statement. In May 2011, he says, I made all the necessary arrangements for the CSTB to undertake tests in accordance with the EN 13501 standard on a Railbon 55 PE cassette variant. The CSTB subsequently informed me that it had stopped the tests conducted in accordance with the EN 13823 standard before the end of the test period, that it therefore could not deliver a classification, and that it proposed to close the matter at that stage. I was not clear why this would be the case, but I was coming to the conclusion that in actual fact, the exposed edges along the outer lines of the rivet variant may mean that once the panel reaches a certain temperature, the core begins to melt, leading to a relatively consistent drip of core from the panel. Whereas in the cassette variant, where the bottom of the panel may have either a single or double return, once the panel reaches a temperature where the core begins to melt, the core does not simply drip out of the panel. Rather, it collects in the return and continues to increase in temperature until it reaches the point of auto-ignition, generating what is referred to as a flashover event. I was aware that products are often tested with the anticipated result not being achieved, and that the testing is therefore stopped and a classification report not produced. This is what was being proposed by the CSTB. I did, however, want a classification report for the cassette PE variant because, as things stood, I had two separate unclassified test results, and now I had a potentially different understanding about the behavior of the cassette variant, and I wanted this to be reflected in an actual classification report. I therefore inquired whether a declassification could be obtained, and when I was informed by the CSTB that this was unlikely, I requested an F classification, the worst classification. The CSTB, however, informed me that it could conduct the test in accordance with the EN 11925 standard, and if the product satisfied the relevant criteria under that test, it could be granted an E classification. I confirmed this, if we go over the page, I confirmed this approach with the CSTB, and the classification report was subsequently received on 12th of October 2011. Relevant documents are exhibited at P117. Now, a number of questions flow from the documents I've shown you and Mr. Verlet's evidence. If there had been any shred of a view within Arconic that test 5B was a rogue, did this test in 2011 dispel that view? If it did not, why did it not? When it came to his theory, as he's explained in some detail in this paragraph about why cassette performed worse, namely, and I summarized, the pooling of molten PE at the return base of the panel, did he share that conclusion with anyone else within Arconic? If he did, with whom? If he did not, why did he not? What was his reaction when discovering that PE in cassette form was capable of producing a flashover event before the end of the test? Did he take steps to alert relevant customers or the BBA? Or did he take any steps to remove the BBA from circulation? If he didn't, why was that? We then come a little bit later in 2011, or indeed starting more or less at the same time in 2011, to the BBA's review of the BBA certificate. You'll recall that the certificate had been issued in January 2008, and it came up for review in 2011, 3 years later. We will look at the audits in a little bit of detail with the BBA witnesses to come. But if I could just summarize the position, it is as follows. The BBA did not perform a factory inspection at Merksheim because the BBA had contracted the CSTB to do that task. A new review project was opened in August 2010 under a new contract which had incorporated the original terms and conditions. That was signed in December 2010. That's BBA 408044, page 11. The BBA project manager at the time requested documents to perform a review, and those documents were provided as requested. And the BBA did not pick up the fact, or were not told, that test 5A only applied to Rayner bond in rivet form, or that there might be a separate test 5B which had been done on cassette. In June 2011, the BBA produced a review report at MET 30535158 _P16, page 174. And that said that the BBA certificate for Rayner bond was valid until 2014, and that was sent to Claude Verlet on the 1st of July 2011. The email of that date from the BBA sending that document to Mr. Verlet is at MET 30535158 _P16, page 179. I just want then to remind you of a document we saw a few minutes ago. Can we go back to the Maxime Bauer email to Mr. Verlet of the 29th of June 2011? This is at MET 30535158, page 172. And I've read this out to you in detail. I won't reread it, but you will recognize that this was the email by which the CSTB told Mr. Verlet that the 2011 test on PE cassette had been terminated before the end of the test. The timing is what matters here. 29th of June 2011. That's 2 days before the 1st of July 2011, when the BBA review report comes from the BBA to Mr. Verlet. So the questions raised by the timing here are, first, whether Mr. Verlet realized that the review that the BBA had just done and had sent to him was missing some very important information, namely the recent result of the CSTB Euro test on PE55 in the cassette variant. We've seen no evidence that Mr. Verlet told the BBA about the results of that test in 2011. And so one has to look at what Mr. Verlet says about that. If we go back to his statement at page 50, paragraph 59, we see what he does say, because he does address this question. We go back to Mr. Verlet's witness statement, please. Paragraph 59. He says, given the purpose and status of the BBA certificate as outlined above, it did not occur to me that it would be necessary at a later date to provide to the BBA any further testing information, such as, for example, the result of the 2011 EN 13501 standard tests on the cassette variant. I had no reason to suppose that this affected the capability of the product itself to achieve class 0, and I believe that if the BBA had been provided with the result of the EN standard class E classification and had requested a further test under BS 476, this would yet, I'm not aware of the detail of the contracts between AAPSAS and the BBA. Over time, Colin Southgate, myself, and Nicholas Remy have received BBA contract documentation, but as I organised the certifications in numerous countries, I did not know all the contractual details relating to such. I rely on the relevant certification body to let me know what information it requires in order to undertake its assessment process. I also have every confidence in the ongoing audit processes that the certification bodies conduct. So you can see what he says. The second sentence there, which starts, I have no reason to suppose that this affected the capability of the product itself to achieve class 0, is one which raises questions. It raises particular questions about how Mr. Verlet came to that conclusion, if it was one he did come to at the time, and whether there was any discussion of that conclusion within Arconic. Later on in 2011, there is further relevant communication. Can we go to MET30531558 underscore P04 at page 54. You can see from this document what Arconic is telling customers at this time, namely November 2011. MET30531558 underscore P04, page 54. Thank you. Now, this is a letter, a formal letter from Claude Verlet to Mr. Gonzalez of Endesa, dated Merksheim, 23rd of November 2011. And he says, as the fire reaction tests recently changed in Europe, and especially for Spain, we kindly inform you that some modifications have to be taken into consideration for your project Endesa. Cladding systems for projects in Spain have to be classified BS3D2 minimum based on the EN 13501 standard. For Rainabond FR, our riveted and cassette systems are both BS1D0. For the Rainabond PE, our riveted systems are BS1D0 and our cassette systems are E. The Endesa project is made with cassettes, therefore we recommend you to use our Rainabond FR product. It seems, well, the document speaks for itself. The question on this document is, why did Claude Verlet not tell the BBA what he was telling his customer, Mr. Gonzalez, here, namely that cassette PE had achieved a class E? If we go to look on Mr. Gonzalez's response of the next day, 24th of November 2011, we can see what he says. This is at MET 3064988 at page 34. And he says, Dear Claude, after reading your letter, as technician, there are some issues I would like to have a bit more clear in order to clarify them to our custom and contractors. I would like a brief explanation about how the fire reaction tests have changed. How did they affect it to the PE? And why, if riveted system gets BS1D0, the cassette one goes straight to E, what, if you let me be sarcastic, is close to the spontaneous combustion? Now, we've not seen in the inquiry records any response from Mr. Verlet to the question posed in this email. From this point on, November 2011, the questions are, did Mr. Verlet realize not only one, that the test 5B was not a rogue, but also two, that the theory that the cassette variant could be assumed to perform better than the rivet variant because of the cassette's lack of exposed edges was no longer tenable, if it ever was? Was it also relevant that Spanish regulation had restricted the use of PE, but the UK had not changed any regulations affecting the use of PE, or in particular requiring only the use of EN 13501 classification? We then go 2 years on to 2013. And an email of April of that year. I'd like to go to MET 3053158 underscore P04 at page 123. Now, this is an internal email within Arconic, dated the 4th of April 2013. We believe that it is to the French sales team at the time, from Hervé Marichet, copied to, among others, Claude Verlet and Peter Froelich. And in the wider context, this is 4th of April 2013, it's a month before, or so, before the 13th of May 2013 email from Debbie French, which she sent to Simco and CEP and other fabricators in the UK in the wake of the UAE fires, and you'll recall that material. It is also after Claude Verlet's discussions in the February of 2013 with CSTB about classifying both rivet and cassette fixed PE to class D, a topic he covers in his witness statement at paragraph 65 on page 19. You can see that the email is from Hervé Marichet, as I say, and he says, "Hi JP and everybody. After talking with Claude, we agreed that we, brackets you, Patrice, Mariva, and me, must not write anything related to fire regulations which has not been validated or issued by Alcoa Technical Department. Why that? After showing Acodi and Sunclear documents that they sent to specifiers and customers, see attached, Claude advised me not to do the same, since these docs involve too much our responsibility on a, quotes, touchy, unquotes, subject. So I passed this info to all French sales dream team, smiley face, so to avoid potential mistakes." And the attachment, which you can see is identified from this email as Classement Feu d'Acodi, is at MET 30533158 underscore P04, page 125. So just a couple of pages on from here. This email raises a number of questions. That's the attachment. And in fact, it's worth looking at attachment while it's on the screen, because you can see what the, well, rather what Arconic's understanding of the equivalents were between the Euro classes and the French classes, particularly that B was equivalent to M1 and E was equivalent to M4. And you can see that on the right-hand side, it says E, M4, cassette, Renebon PE, Alucobon PE, Larsen PE. The questions that arise on this email are, well, what was the touchy subject exactly? What, if anything, was it that Mr. Verlet had instructed the French sales team not to discuss with customers? Which customers? And was it a specific instruction not to say anything about fire regulation in particular? The question for Mr. Freilich would be what he understood by that message when he received it, and what, if anything, did he do about it? We then come a little bit later in that year to July 2013, when Arconic instructed the CSTV to conduct further tests. The results of those tests were returned in November 2013. We've seen the document in the evidence of Mr. Schmidt, but just to remind you, can we look at Claude Verlet's exhibits at MET 3053158 underscore P02 at page 38, please? This is a run of emails that you will have seen before. At the very bottom of page 38, we have an email from Benoit Forest to Philippe Bontran at Arconic on the 7th of November 2013, with the results of the SBI, single burning item test. And just to remind you, the SBI test is EN 13823. And he says, if we go over the page, that the result for the rivet fix PE was class C S2 D0. And the result, or rather the test for the cassette system, if you look a little lower down, said that the test had to be stopped at 800 seconds out of 1260 seconds for widespread ignition. Best possible classification E, ignition test. Now, that was the third time that the cassette test had been stopped for widespread ignition. We had test 5B in 2004, late 2004. We had the test done in the February of 2011, and now we've got it again in November 2013. Now, the class C that you can see on this page, C S2D0 for PE in Rivet was not memorialized or formalized in any final classification report, as opposed to a test report. Instead, Arconic, it appears, decided to classify all PE cord Reynobond, whether Rivet or cassette, as Class E. And you've seen this before. I'll just show it to you again. MET30 53158 underscore P04, page 135. This is the CSTB classification report reissue dated the 31st of January 2014. And you'll recall what's noted at the bottom of that page. If you just scroll down to the bottom of the page, it's a cancellation and rewrite, essentially, of the February 2011 and test 5A from January 2005. So that's how matters stood as at the 31st of January 2014. Both Rivet and cassette were Class E. We then move through 2014. The next thing is the email of the 3rd of February 2014, which was sent by Mr. Verlet to RAF Liste Commerciale Externe, among others, informing the sales representatives in various European countries that the new classification for Reynobond architecture in PE was Class E. We looked at that document with Arconic witnesses who gave evidence. There is no evidence that we have seen that Deborah French for the UK sent that information to her UK customers. For your note, her evidence about this is at day 88, page 138, line 2, and page 140 at line 12. She accepted that she would have read that email and read it, and that she didn't forward it. And I don't want to paraphrase her evidence, but you have her evidence about that. But that's the context of this event in the wider history. Let's then look at the communications in the months after the 3rd of February 2014 email, and specifically what happened in relation to a project called Woodbury Down, a residential high-rise property in North London. Let me go to MET30 64988 at page 97, please. On page 97 here, we see an email dated the 6th of March 2014 from a Mr. Steve Berger of Arconic to Michael Graff of Wittenauer in relation to Woodbury Down London Reynobond core selection. And if you go to page 98, please, first, you could see that Steve Berger is an area sales manager for Alcoa in Germany. And if we go back a page to where we were, page 97, he says, "Hello, Mr. Graff. As discussed over the telephone, it is accurate in England a PE core is enough because PE and FR have the same test requirement." And at page 88 of this email run, we just dot back to that. We can see that attached to the original German version of this email, because what I've shown you is an English translation, there is a list of fire classifications showing that both PE and FR have class 0 in the UK. You can see there Great Britain, and both PE and FR are said to have passed both Part 6 and Part 7, and therefore have class 0. If we go to page 96 in the same exhibit run, we can see what happens to the email from Steve Berger it is forwarded to a number of people in the Lindner group. From Michael Graff. And the Lindner group appear to have been the facade specialists on the Woodbury Down project. If we go to the bottom half of that page, you can see that Mr. Wittenauer says to Mr. Eigner of Lindner in the first paragraph, fire protection. He says, Rainabond offers two different core materials. On the one hand, a PE core, which in Germany qualifies for the classification B2, normally flammable. On the other hand, the FR core, which in Germany qualifies as B1, hardly flammable. The FR core is in principle also made of PE material, which however is mixed with fire retardant substances and thus qualifies as B1. In England, according to Alcoa, even the slightly cheaper PE core would meet the fire protection requirements. To what extent this makes sense would have to be coordinated with the customer or the authorities. Now, Mr. Dobmeier of the Lindner Group takes this up because he gets this email from Mr. Eigner, as you see a little bit higher up the page. He then takes this up with Arconic. If we scroll slowly up the page, you can see that the email that I've just read out to you to Mr. Eigner gets sent to Mr. Dobmeier, also of Lindner. And then if we scroll on up to page 95, we can see that he comes back to Steve Berger on the 4th of April, 2014. And he says, Dear Mr. Berger, for the construction project Woodbury Down in London, you've sent us the attached documents, including the excerpt from Class Nought summary report, 4 pages. Just note the 4 pages there. For full supporting documentation of the materials used by us, I would like to ask you to send me the full report, 9 pages, please. In addition, we need the supporting documents 32284 and 322845 to account for the products to our building contractor. This summary should be read in conjunction with and not accepted as a substitute for the Exober Warrington fire test reports numbers 322844 and 322845. Those test reports may include additional information which may be relevant to the assessment of the potential fire hazard of the product. Now, we can tell from those certificate references that the Lindner Group was provided with the 2012 classification reports for Rainabond 55 with an FR core, done under BS 476, Part 6 and 7, dated the 5th of November 2012. Those are at ARC 610, 50610, and ARC 50608, respectively. We looked at those with the Arconic witnesses briefly. So that's what gets sent to them. The 2012 classification reports for Rainabond 55 with an FR core. If we go up to page 94 and look at the bottom half of the page, we can see how Mr. Berger responds to Mr. Dobmeier. He says, thank you for your message. After consultation with our technical department, I unfortunately have to inform you that we are not permitted to provide you with the full version of the Class Nought summary report. This document does indeed contain some information which is owned by Alcoa, such as secrets regarding the names of the supplier, material specifications, etc. The same statement applies to the reports numbers 322844 and 322845. Other manufacturers only publish the results, classification, and not the full reports as well. If you have further questions on this subject, please do not hesitate to contact our Mr. Claude Vernet, Head of Technical Department. It gives a number. Now, again, you can see the references there to 322844 and 322845. Those are the 2012 FR tests, not PE. And if we could go on up then to page 93 in the same email run, Mr. Dobmeier responds on the same day. And he says, Dear Mr. Berger, of course I understand that your company does not want to hand over the test report. However, you also want your product to be used, and our duty is to account for the product with regard to the building contractor. Moreover, in contrast to the opinion of your technical department, you are only allowed to publish the report in its entirety. Every classification report provides for this, as does your report. This version of the report has been produced from a PDF format electronic file that has been provided by Exova Warrington Fire to the sponsor of the report and must only be reproduced in full. Extracts or abridgments of reports must not be published without permission of Exova Warrington Fire. As far as I know, there are no secrets in the classification report, and your competitors will also send us the complete documents. We will not forward this information and will not start recreating a sandwich panel. For this reason, I ask you once again to send me the complete test and classification report. And above that on page 93, we can see Mr. Verley's response, very brief. Also, the 4th of April 2014, copied to Steve Berger. Dear Mr. Dogmeyer, I've tried to call you but could not reach you. Would it please be possible that we talk about it together? When would you have time for it? Regards, Claude. And let's go to ARC 50609, please. We can see that this is the report they were discussing, the Class 0 summary report, 5th of November 2012. And if we go to the 4th page, page 4 of this document, you'll see that that is the last page. And at the very bottom of it, again, you have the date, but you can see just above the date, 5th November 2012, it says 4 of 9, page numbers 4 of 9. So that's the 4 pages that got sent. We do have, of course, a copy of the full report, the 9 pages. Let's go to that. That's at EXO 401948. Not exhibited by an Arconic witness. This is from Exova's disclosure. And if you look at page 4 of 1948, under introduction, you can see there that it summarizes the tests that Mr. Dogmeyer referred to, numbers 3222844 and 3222845. You can see them there. Towards the middle of the page, at the blue header introduction, you can see the penultimate paragraph there, which starts, "This summary should be read in conjunction with," is exactly as Mr. Dogmeyer has copied it or perhaps screenshotted it into his email, which we saw earlier. The questions which arise on this email run and this event, if I can call it that, are, did Arconic cut down reports like this routinely? Was it their policy to send only cut down reports unless pressed by customers for the full report? Was that the case even where the testing house, such as Exova in this instance, required that the full report be provided? If we look at page 2 of the abridged 4-page version, we go back to that. I say the abridged 4-page version, I mean the 4-page abridged version of the 9-page version at ARC 50609. You can see that there is a table, and in the first row, you can see that the product, if we blow it up, is described as, under product reference, Renabond FR. The original question posed by Lindner was whether PE core was enough in England. That's what Steve Berger was asked. This is a report about FR. It's not a report about PE. The questions which arise on this whole exchange, beyond those I've identified already, are why Arconic sent a report on FR core when the question was about PE core, and was all the available information sent to the client in order to assist him with the decision he had to make. The request was for information about which core of Renabond could be used in the UK. if all the material in Arconic's possession was not sent to that customer to enable him to make that decision, the question is, why not? Specifically, was this customer told that there was no test report supporting the classification of Reynobond 55 PE to class 0? If he wasn't told that, is there a reason why he wasn't told that? We next go back a month or so to the October of 2014, and further European tests run at that time. Can we look, please, at Mr. Verley's statement at page 21, paragraph 70? He says, the next EN 13501 testing that I organised on Reynobond 55 PE was later in 2014. It had become clear from discussions within AAP SAS of the wider market that there was a desire to again have separate classification reports for the PE, rivet and cassette variants to more accurately reflect the classifications that each had in practice obtained. And then he goes on to explain how to achieve that goal. As you've heard already, the rivet variant of PE was tested and classified CS2D0 in October 2014 in various colours. And from that point on, all, or at least the various colours of Reynobond PE rivet were class C. Just to remind you, before that, from the 31st of January 2014, the class was class E for both rivet and cassette variants. And you saw the CSTB classification report reissue of the 31st of January 2014 a few moments ago. So we have this period during 2014, from the 31st of January until October of that year, when Reynobond PE in both fixings was a class E. In October, it achieves, or rivet achieves, a class C S2 D0. The references for that are at ARC 50397 for the rivet, and for the cassette, MET 53158 _ P02, page 105. And just, it's probably worth just putting the rivet report up on the screen. ARC 50397, please. You can see that this is a classification report under EN 13501, commercial brand Reynobond 55 PE riveted system, date December the 4th, 2014. It's done pursuant to a test done in October 2014. And if you look at the classification on page 4, you can see that it's CS2D0. And the field of application below that, under 4.3, last bullet point, various colours. Now, the questions that arise at or by this point, the end of 2014, as I say, the test was in October. This classification report is dated the 4th of December 2014. The questions that arise by this point are, among other things, about the motivations for this further reclassification. Who was it in the wider market that had a desire for separate classification of rivet as opposed to cassette PE, according to Mr. Verney? Where was that desire coming from? Was there also perhaps a desire within Arconic to have separate classifications? If so, who was desiring that? What was the driver for this change? Was it commercial, or was it technical, or was it both in varying degrees? Now that brings us to the end of 2014. One can look across to what was happening at Grenfell Tower at this point. You've seen the documents in Module 1, and when Deborah French gave evidence to the inquiry. And we know that she sent the BBA certificate to Harley on the 23rd of April 2014 under an email with the reference CEP 50281. That certificate said that Rainabond 55 PE was classified as Euro Class B. We know that as at the 23rd of April 2014, Rainabond 55 PE was Class E in any fixing system, rivet or cassette, as a result of the certification issued on the 31st of January 2014, which rewrote, among other things, Test 5A. So when the planners approved Rainabond PE cassette fix, as they did at the end of July 2014 informally, and by the end of September 2014 formally, Rainabond PE and cassette fix was a Class E, and had always been, and rivet was also a Class E. After the reclassification on the 4th of December 2014, the cassette remained Class E, rivet was Class C, C S2 D0. Therefore, neither of them met the EN 13501 classification in ADB. Now, for all that happened in 2014 on the Grenfell Tower project, there was no order for Rainabond in 2014. That did not, in fact, happen until March 2015. Let's turn to that year. At the end of 2014, we know that Deborah French left Arconic and Vince Meakin started in May 2015. And in the interim, Mr. Froelich, assisted by Gwenaël Derendanger, managed UK sales. Let's look then now at what Arconic knew internally about the Grenfell Tower project. We start on this topic by looking at Gwenaël Derendanger's Exhibit 1 at MET 53159, page 86. This is an email which appears to be automatically generated by Arconic's CRM, or Customer Relation Management Database. And I've taken that from the email address at the very top of the screen, do not reply at crmondemand.com. This email is dated Thursday, April the 10th, 2014. And it's sent to Gwenaël Derendanger. Subject, Labo request client Harley Curtain Walling, créé par Gwenaël Derendanger. 4/10/14, that may be 10th of April, must be 10th of April 2014, is submitted. The first line of the text, you can see, says, subject Grenfell Tower project, client Harley Curtain Wall, contact Mark Harris, use Rainabond 55, transformation mode, cassettes. Questions arising on that document. Did the mode of fabrication have to be entered into the CRM, as we can see it has been here, in order to generate an order? Did somebody have to manually enter the transformation mode, cassettes, into the CRM field? If they did have to enter that manually, who would have put cassettes in this document? Is it right that Arconic, as a result of this system, could know, in any given case, the fixing method for any given project? And is it right that in this case, Arconic did know that Rainabond 55 in cassette form was going to go on to Grenfell Tower project if the order was followed through? Deborah French gave evidence about this and told the inquiry that she believed that this document would have been generated by Gwenaël Derendanger. That's French at day 88, page 76, lines 16 to 17. If that is correct, questions arising are how Ms. Derendanger would have known to generate those details, and in particular the fabrication mode, cassette, and whether she would have been doing so on instructions from somebody else, such as Deborah French, or perhaps Peter Froelich, or perhaps, well, one doesn't know. Let's then pursue a little further the quotations and the order documents for Grenfell Tower. Can we go to Grenelle d'Arendanger's witness statement at MET 30's 53191 at page 36? In paragraph 104, she says this: on 3rd of March 2015, I sent an email to Neil Wilson, CEP, copied to Peter Froelich, attaching a formal quotation for the Grenfell Tower project, addressed to CEP with reference 2015-8411. In the email, I refer to a telephone call with Mr. Wilson earlier that day. I do not remember the details of that call, but Mr. Wilson would have asked me to produce a quotation and provided all the details that I needed in order to generate it. I do not remember whether the call was discussed during this call or subsequently with Peter. However, it was a UK project, and unless the customer told me that they wanted FR, I would have quoted for PE. A copy of this email and the quotation appear from page 278 to 281 of GD1. Let me look at the quotation she refers to, please. This is at ARC 6010. We can see that it bears a quotation number 2015-8411, and it's dated the 3rd of March 2015, if you look a little bit lower down in the same part of the document. And it says, position 1, Raynaud bond, aluminium composite material architecture, RB55. If you look a little bit lower down, it says feature standard, coating topside DG5000, 2-coat smoke silver metallic E9107S. And there's a price below that, £23.25 per square metre. One question on this document is whether PE was requested by CEP specifically, or whether it was Arconic's assumption that PE was required, because CEP had not told Arconic that they wanted FR. And I say CEP, that is because immediately underneath the quotation number, if you go back to the top of the screen, it is CEP to whom the quotation is addressed. You can see that immediately under the date 3rd of March. Now, we know that this eventually led to an order, and let's look at some more documents on that. Mr. Chairman, I note the time.
Yes.
Perhaps it's a convenient moment for a break before we go on to look at documents that do lead to this order.
Yes, well, that's a good idea. How are you getting on? Quite well, I sense.
Yes, absolutely. I shall be finished comfortably before the usual time for breaking.
Right. Well, we'll take a break now. We'll resume at 3:30 and see what you have in store for us then. All right, 3:30 then, please. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. Mr. Millett is in the course of presenting the Arconic documents, and I think he's ready to continue. Mr. Millett, if you're ready, when it suits you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we go to Peter Froehlich's exhibit at page 28, MET 30s 53161. Page 28. This is an email Yes, this is an email from Gwenelle Durandanger to Peter Froehlich. If we can enlarge it, please, so it's more visible. Thank you very much. And it's dated the 13th of March, 2015. And the subject is Projects with CEP UK. And she says, I just spoke with Neil Wilson from CEP UK by phone. And here are some interesting news to share with you. And if you look at the second bullet point down, she says, Project Grenfell Tower, 3,000 square meters in RB55 PE 4 millimeters, 1,750 millimeters width, smoke silver metallic color. They won the project. Total project represents 6,000 square meters, according to him. So we should get the PO for it shortly. And note that it's PE there that she refers to. So we then go to the order documents at MET 30s 53161, page 40. So it's the same exhibit run at page 40. And here's the purchase order from CEP. And you can see that the original project order date is the 18th of March 2015. Purchase order number ARC 5213/A/023, as you can see. At the top right-hand corner there. And under description, it says the order is for Reynobond 4 millimeters by 1,750 millimeters. There's no mention on this document of the fact that what is being ordered is Reynobond 55 with a PE core. It's silent on the core. It's just described as E9107S smoke silver metallic. Now let's go to the email at MET 30s 53161, page 31. So 9 documents back, or 9 pages back in the same email run, or same exhibit run, I should say. This is an email from CEP to Gwenelle Durandanger on the 18th of March, so same day. And it says Deb, even though it's sent to Gwenelle Durandanger, and that may be a reference to Deborah Talbot, who's copied in on this, and she's a CEP person. Please can you order the following: smoke silver metallic 4 millimeters thick Reynobond as attached quotation. And if you just cast your eye down those, there are 2 sets of orders, both to CEP at different quantities. Same totals, but different, slightly different makeup, with a total price. I split the requirement into 2 equal call-offs. The key point about this document is that you'll see that there's no mention here either of PE core. So the purchase order doesn't have PE core, nor does the order or the email raising the order. But if we look at the order acknowledgement at ARC 50149, we see that it does identify the core as PE. It's ARC 50149, and this is dated the 18th of March 2015. And this is an Alcoa document. So this is the other side of the transaction. This is what Arconic generates in response to the purchase order, which we've seen. And you can see there that in relation to the order, PE is identified. And you can see that in the 2 major columns in the middle of the page. Reynobond 55 smoke silver metallic E9107S DG 5000 wash coat. But just above it, it says PE in the case of each element of this order, PE. And one has to read across the 2 columns, the Lacage columns, Lacage recto and Lacage verso. So topside coating and reverse side coating. There's no distinction between the two in the way in which this product is identified in this order acknowledgement, so far as we can see from this document. Then let's go back to the quotation at ARC 6010, which we saw earlier on before the break. And at the bottom of the page, if we go right to the bottom of page 1, I showed you the price. What I didn't show you was the names of those at Arconic. It's Gwenfell Health and Peter Froelich. Now, Mr. Froelich explains in his statement, and I don't think there's a need to see it, it's paragraph 40.1 on page 12, MET30 53197, page 12, that his name is on this purchase order because there was no UK salesperson at the time, and that the price quoted, £23.25 per square metre, was lower than he was able to approve. So this might also have gone to Alain Flacon, who was the director of sales and marketing at the time, for his approval. The questions that arise on this document run I've shown you is whether anybody in the inside sales team at Arconic would actually consider, or did actually consider, whether the order was appropriate for this client, and indeed for any client. And if so, who would that person be? Was there any process within Arconic for ensuring that PE was suitable for Grenfell Tower, particularly as Arconic knew and had recorded that the intended fixing was to be cassette? Now, 2015 was a year when the existence of the La Crosse fire in Australia came to the attention of Arconic. And I'm going to show you one or two pictures, photographs and other things, which show fire in tall buildings. And I ought to give a trigger warning for anybody who finds that too difficult to see. They won't come for a few minutes yet, so people have time to avert themselves. But at this time, as I say, Arconic was told about a cladding fire which had occurred in the La Crosse building in Melbourne. The fire had itself broken out on the evening of the 24th of November 2014. In the April and again in the June 2015, a post-incident analysis report of the fire done by an outfit called MFB was sent to several people within Arconic. Those people included Alain Flacon, Claude Verlet, and Gwenfell Health. Can we go first to MET30 53159 at page 404? This is an email from John Cobb at Simonite in New Zealand to Gwenfell Health and Alain Flacon at Arconic. And he attaches the post-incident analysis at La Crosse. He says, "Hi, Gwen and Alain. I have attached a fire report for a building that caught fire in Melbourne. As you can see, it is pretty scathing of our Luco best, but also ACM in general. As you know, we only use your FR panel. Would it be possible to send me all your current fire test documentation and any material we can use to defend the impending criticism from local media?" Can we then go to MET30 53158 underscore P10, page 183. This is an email at the top of the screen from Brad Woods to Claude Verlet. And it attaches the post-incident analysis La Crosse Docklands report. And he says, "Hi, Claude, this is the fire report incident from Melbourne that I've been talking about." And Brad Woods appears to be some kind of design or cladding professional at Architectural Glass and Cladding Proprietary Limited in New South Wales. So he sends that to Mr. Verlet. Also, you can see it's sent to Alain Flacon, Gwenfell Health and Julia Julie Kasianik at Arconic. Can we then look at MET30's 53158_P11 at page 113? This is an email from Claude Verlet to CSTB, Martial Bonhomme and Gildas Creach, subject Feu en Australie, fire in Australia, post-incident analysis across Docklands. Hello, please find attached a very interesting report that I would like to share with you. And he forwarded also to Frank Ritter at 3A on the same day, asking whether he had already seen it. There's no need to turn up the reference, but it's at MET30's 53158_P12, page 41. Now let's look at the report itself. This is at MET30's 53158_P12 at page 42. This is the front page, internal front page of the report produced by MFB into the La Crosse Docklands fire post-incident analysis report. And you can see that MFB are based in Richmond, Victoria, I think one can see at the bottom left-hand corner. And if we go to page 65 of the exhibit, we can see what is said. And it says, the highlighted points are highlighted in the document we have, but towards the bottom of the screen, it says, importantly, the MFB is not aware. Just reading that out, it says, importantly, the MFB is not aware of any competitor aluminium polyethylene panel product which has been successful in being determined as non-combustible when tested under AS 1530.1 1994 combustibility test for materials, and that's the Australian standard appetite. As mentioned elsewhere in this report, many competitor products have, however, gained a certificate of conformity for their use under the ABCB code mark scheme based on alternative test results. If we go to page 67 of this document, we can see a little bit more detail under section 6.1, external wall cladding, Alucobest rapid fire spread. MFB comment. First-hand accounts from attending MFB firefighters and residents of the building describe the fire as appearing to be associated directly with the facade of the building rather than the combustible contents, and storage on the external balconies. Burning and flaming facades on high-rise buildings is not a common phenomenon witnessed by the MFB, and it is of genuine concern. Of even greater concern is the speed and intensity of the fire spread. And then there's a photograph of the rapid vertical fire spread only 4 minutes after level 8 sprinkler activation. And then if you look a little bit lower down on this same page, you see the last paragraph. From the timeline described above, it is reasonable to derive external vertical fire spread occurred from the 8th floor to the roof above the 21st floor within 10 to 15 minutes, penetrating the adjacent internal rooms on all floors. In the case examined in this report, the upward vertical spread of fire was restricted only by the height of the building. If the building and the construction of the external walls continued to a greater height of upwards of 21 stories, it is highly probable fire spread would have continued beyond 21 stories. Looking at page 68, can we look at the second and fourth paragraphs on that page? The second paragraph says, in different circumstances and in contrast to the outcomes of this fire event, we may have witnessed internal fire growth and spread established over 16 plus levels, aided by high easterly winds back into the face of the building. This would be an extremely high challenge event for safe building evacuation and effective fire brigade intervention. And then the fourth paragraph says, the fire resulted in internal ignition occurrences on all floors where external fire spread occurred. Simultaneous fire incidents over many floors at heights possibly well beyond external reach capabilities of the attending fire brigade is an extremely challenging scenario for successful fire brigade intervention. Based on the observations of the fire incident, the chief officer believes that the building solution does not incorporate elements to the degree necessary to avoid the spread of fire. And still in part 12 of this exhibit, as we're in, can we go to page 144, please? This is Appendix 12 to the MFB analysis report on the La Crosse fire in November 2014, which sets out a number of other cladding fires around the world, and some of them will be by now familiar to most people. On page 144 itself, we can see the Torch Tower in Dubai, 21st of February 2015, the Mermoz Tower in Roubaix in France in 2012, that's familiar to you. Page 145, the Al Tayer Tower in Sharjah in 2012. You can see metal composite cladding. Second bullet point down, aluminium polyethylene composite panel facade. And the Saif Belhaza building in Ticom in Dubai, 2012, second bullet point, aluminium polyethylene composite panel facade. Now the next page, please, page 146. Tamwheel Tower, Dubai, 2012. You can see the picture. Second bullet point, aluminium polyethylene composite panel facade. And underneath that, Wushin Golden Suites, Busan, South Korea. You can see the photograph of that fire. Second bullet point down, aluminium polyethylene composite panel facade. At the next page, page 147, Water Club Tower, Atlantic City, USA. There's a photograph there of that fire. Second bullet point down, aluminium polyethylene composite panel facade. And then the text on page 147 itself, beneath that photograph. What is evident from the photos and descriptions above is the rapid and extensive vertical fire spread up and down the buildings in direct correlation with the fire at 673 to 683 La Trobe Street, Docklands, that's La Crosse. Whilst the brand and make of the panels are not identified in the report, they would all appear to be of very similar material and construction to the material installed in the facade of the subject building. Also, the fire location in almost all cases is generally on a configuration of the facade where internal returns, channels, and/or balconies are present. This is perhaps attributed to the higher incidence of ignition sources on balconies and the retention of heat in channels and returns in the form and shape of the facade, rather than on flat plane areas of facades where loss of heat straight to the atmosphere may occur. I don't think needs any comment, that report. You can see how it comes into Arconic. At the same time, in early 2015, Arconic changed the core color of PE from translucent to black. I don't need to go into the details of that other than to give you some documentary references. There was notification to customers and to the CSTB, but not to BBA. Documents to look at would be the CSTB notification at MET30 53158 _ P02, page 128. Customers being informed, for example, by Peter Froelich, MET30 53161 at page 1. CEP were told, CEP 50 547, and CEP 40 7141, and CEP 30 54338. Genius Facades being told the same thing at MET30 53161, page 8, and Argonaut, another of Arconic's UK fabricators, at MET30 53161, page 9. There was another fire in October 2015. This is at the in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, at the King Fahd Medical Center. Again, I should give the trigger warning. We will be showing pictures of buildings damaged by fire, if not in fact on fire. If we can go to MET30 53158 _ P10 at page 168. We can put page 168 and also page 169 up together, please, simply because it's easier to read. If we have 168, the bottom of 168, this is an email from Nazi Chaoul on Wednesday, the 14th of October 2015 to Hafid Asrar. And the subject is fire in King Fahd Medical Center, Riyadh, Aluko Bond FR, find the attached pictures. And they're attached. You could see the pictures a little earlier on in the exhibit run at pages 164 to 166, if we could just quickly look at those. 164, and then 165, and then 166. This is the fire damage. And then 166, please, as well. You can see that briefly. This is the fire damage done at the King Fahd Medical Center in Riyadh using a leucobond. If we go to 168, please, you can see that the email, which had come from the source I showed you, makes its way to Claude Verlet. Looking up the email chain, it is an email from Claude Verlet back to Hafid Asrar, who I should have said is at Alcoa, was at Alcoa, also to Alain Flacon and Serge Vala, 16th of October 2015. FR showed a very good behavior, he says. In PE, the fire would have spread over the entire height of the tower, while in this case, only the area near the fire is affected. Long live FR. And then there is a colon, a dash, and a closed bracket, which is likely, I think one can see, is a smiley face. We can see that Claude Verlet does not appear to have any knowledge of the facade system. But we can see what he says about in PE, the fire would have spread. The question which this document raises is whether his general observation about PE on this document was derived from his having seen the Lacrosse fire report earlier in 2015, or perhaps from other knowledge, earlier knowledge that he might have had. And further, what were his views at this time, now, October 15, about the fire risks of using aluminium composite material with a polyethylene core at height? We come then to 2016. There are two further fires in that year. The first is at the address in the UAE on New Year's Eve, 2015 to 16. Can we go please to MET30 53158 underscore P10, page 174. This is the image that was shared within Arconic in emails about that fire. And if we can go to those emails, 2 pages back, please, at 172. You can see that at the bottom of the page, it's an email from Robert Campbell of UK Rhenolux. He's Area Sales UK Rhenolux. We heard a little bit about him from Deborah French. To Capri Petit and Serge Vala, Renault Dual. And in the highlighted part, it says the hotel in Dubai allegedly had a leucobond PE on it when it went quickly up in flames on New Year's Eve. And then if we go, the sentence before that I should also have read out. She says, or he says, that it seems that architects are once again sitting up and pondering about how safe is a composite with a PE core. And that email went into the inbox of Alain Flacon. If we can go to the second email from the top, we see that. And Mr. Flacon replies, second email from the top, copied this time to, among others, Peter Froelich, Claude Verlet, and Claude Schmidt. No surprise, the only good news is that it seems to be AB products. And at the top of the chain, we see Claude Verlet's response to Alain Flacon and Serge Vala. I hope that PE will gradually be excluded from facade cladding because each time it is the image of all the ACMs that takes a hit. Now, the question about that email run and his response at the end of it there is whether anything was done within Arconic about PE, whether by Mr. Verlet or anybody else. Why did Mr. Verlet hope that PE would gradually be excluded from facade cladding, while Arconic was continuing to manufacture it and to sell it? If we can scroll down in Claude Verlet's exhibits to page 176, only 4 pages on from this, you can see that the same day, 6th of January 2016, Guy Scheidecker sends an email to Claude Verlet, subject TR the address, forwarding the attachment. Claude, can you read this article, please? I'd like to know what you think about it. They are destroying the ACM in PE, and I don't think it's the only component responsible for such a fire. I look forward to hearing your feedback. The question there is whether that fairly reflected the attitude of Arconic's senior management to PE at this time, and explore what was meant by it. The second fire of the two in 2016 to refer to is the one at Place d'Haguenau in Strasbourg in, we believe, January 2016. You've seen something of that already. Can we look at MET 30's53158 underscore P10, page 178? So it's 2 pages on from this. There is the email with which I think you're familiar, from Claude Verlet to Alain Flacon and others at Arconic, dated the 19th of January 2016, and the embedded photograph. The translation is on the next page, page 179, if we could please look at that. And he says, hello, we were very lucky. The Volek Tower is in Reynabon, PE, 10 meters from the fire. And he sets out an email address there and embeds it. Fortunately, the wind didn't change direction, but we really need to stop proposing PE in architecture, exclamation mark. We are in the know, in inverted commas, and I think it is up to us to be proactive, ... and then in caps, at last. Now, the concern here is, as one can see, that the fire on the roof of the building in the Rue de Haguenau might have spread to a building 10 meters away clad in Reynabon PE. This time it's not a Lucobond or some other manufacturer's PE, it's Reynabon. The question is, what happened to Mr. Verlet's warning to senior management, Messrs. Flacon and Marconnet? Did they do anything about this? And if so, what? Now, there's then, before this time, a review done by the BBA between 2013 and 2015. We've not yet presented anything about the BBA review of certificate 08/4510. That became due in 2014. The review, in fact, started, as we'll see from later witnesses, in October 2013. Between October 2013 and January 2015, the BBA made repeated attempts to contact Arconic. And there are at least 5 attempts to speak to Arconic. And one can see that at MET 30's53158 underscore P17 185 to 182, and also 186. And on several occasions, the BBA clearly requested information and confirmation that there had been no changes that would affect the suitability for the use of Reynabon PE. And just for the note, MET 30's53158 underscore P17 at page 182, paragraph 2 of that email. We will be looking at those emails in due course with witnesses. There is no evidence that the inquiry has seen that anybody in Arconic ever responded with any positive information relating to the many new fire testing documents and certifications that Arconic had acquired since the first issue of the BBA certificate in January 2008. The question is, why was there no communication about the revised classifications provided at this time? We know the review was completed and the certificate was confirmed as valid for 3 more years until January 2017. It was signed off by Valentina Amoroso, the BBA project manager for Arconic Reynabon 55, on the 10th of April 2015, and authorized by Pre Nakomo, the team manager at the BBA. The certificate itself is at MET 30's53158. All of that will be explored in evidence with the BBA witnesses to come. The reissue of the BBA certificate had been due in the July of 2014. And in fact, the cycle was overdue. The review cycle had run over. In the context of the Grenfell Tower project, and to repeat to some extent what I've said before, in July 2014, the information that would have been current was under the 2014 tests. At that point, as I say, between January and October 2014, Renault Bond PE in Rivet was a Class E. Cassette was also a Class E, as it always had been and would always remain. Had the BBA certificate been updated accurately and reissued at that time, then the fire performance of PE cassette might have come to the attention of Studio E, Ryden, Harley, or CEP. And as we know, in July 2014, the planners were looking at the mock-up of the facade and were insisting on a cassette fix, to the disappointment, as we've seen from Module 1, of several parties involved in the project. There was then a further BBA review in October 2016 to June 17. Before we get to that, I should just mention a further event in the May of 2015. In that month, a reissue contract was raised by the BBA, and it's a BBA 3010889 under reference S1/57262. And that was stated to cover non-technical updates to the certificate. It was sent to Arconic on the 5th of May 2015. That, as we can see from exhibits to Mr. Verley's statement at MET 30/53158_P18, page 31. It was signed and returned by Mr. Verley under his email at the same place, page 38, MET 30/53158_P18, page 38. And there was a signed contract, page 41, the same exhibit run. It appears that the contract was never taken up by the BBA, and the project was abandoned at that stage. And we would have investigated with Mr. Verley whether he sought to push it along at all, and if he didn't, why he didn't. Why it was, from his perspective, that reissue did not proceed. Going back then to the next period of review, October 16 to June 17, which is when the certificate came up for its triennial review. There was another review. Now, there's one document to look at from this review, which I should show you, which is at MET 30/53158P18 _P18, page 61. The document we're going to look at in due course with the BBA witnesses, but this is from the Arconic side internally. This is a draft of an email sent to be sent to Valentina Amoroso, who had conduct as project manager of this review, the 2016-17 review of the BBA certificate. And it's an email from Nicolas Remy to Claude Verley on the 18th of October 2016. And it's a response in draft to some of her requests. And we'll see that in detail in due course with the witnesses. But what he says next to the word draft is what matters for this purpose. And he says, I really feel like I'm dealing with something that is not clear cut. They're coming to do a review, and I'm informing them that what they're coming to review has been completely modified without them knowing anything about it. And above that, we see Mr. Verley's response back to Nicolas Remy. If you look up, scroll up the page. He says, same day, 18th October 2016, hi, we'll talk about the situation before distribution in order to alleviate this bad impression for you, smiley face, Claude. The question is, did Mr. Verley have a conversation with Mr. Remy? If he did, what did he tell him? How was this resolved internally within Arconic? And as I say, we will come back to this email chain and the detail of it in the correspondence as between the BBA and Arconic with the witnesses. Mr. Chairman, I've come to the end of this presentation. It may well be that there are other documents to which core participants would wish to have attention drawn. This is not the usual situation where there is a witness who must be asked any further questions before release and the concomitant pressure of time on us. There is therefore plenty of opportunity for core participants, if they want to refer to any further documents that they consider to be relevant. They can do that in their written closing submissions before for module 2, which are in due time. And that, of course, includes Arconic as well. So the fact that there are documents which others consider to be relevant and need to be put into the public domain for the purposes of the record does not mean, the fact that I haven't covered them does not mean that they aren't relevant and should not be put into the public domain. There is plenty of opportunity for all core participants to identify those documents in due course. That said, that brings me to the end of my presentation.
Yes, well, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Millett. That's been very helpful to get that overview of the documents and the way in which events developed over the 10 years or so before the Grenfell fire. So, and as you've said, others will be entitled to bring documents specifically to the panel's attention insofar as they think that they are important and haven't been properly opened already. So I think at this stage, it just remains for me to thank you for taking us through those documents, and that I think will draw an end to today's hearing. And tomorrow we have another witness, is that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have the first of the BBA witnesses, Mr. Hamo Gregorian.
Well, good. Well, we'll look forward to seeing him at 10 o'clock tomorrow. But for the time being, that will conclude the business for today. So thank you very much. 10 o'clock tomorrow.